Are you digging up the dirt on your dead? Want to find out how? Hear the latest on new family history sources and websites with interesting and fun guests and experts. Find out what other people have been learning about their ancestors. From kings to thieves, inventors to farmers, nothing that's been discovered should surprise us anymore, but it always does. Find out what we mean. Great family history stories and information are on the way now with Extreme Genes, Family History Radio, and extremegenes.com.
Grandpa stole his first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
Hello, Genies, and welcome back to another edition of Extreme Genes Family History Radio, America's family history show, where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. I am Fisher, your radio root sleuth, and what a show we have for you this week. You know, we spend a lot of time here on helping you with preservation. Our preservation authority, Tom Perry, will, of course, be here later in the program. But before that, we'll be talking to Rick Turley. He is the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. And as you probably know, the LDS Church has been gathering family history materials for public use for well over a century. And just like any of us, their family history department has a problem: how to preserve the millions of rolls of microfilm they gathered over much of the 20th century, and how to be sure not to lose the digital materials they've been gathering in the modern era. We'll talk to Rick about where and how these materials are protected, what plans they have to preserve rare documents in the future, and ask him what we as individuals can do to assure that years of our efforts aren't lost in a single nauseating crash. I can already tell you he'll have some very specific advice and a lot of inside scoop on what their professionals have learned. We had a great response to our extremegenes.com poll last week. We asked you how far back by generation your earliest photo goes. Number one was second great-grandparent at 36%. Number two was fourth great-grandparent at 27%. Third was earlier than fourth grade, a fifth or even sixth great-grandparent at 17%. And fourth was third great-grandparent at 14%. That's the category I fit into. Thanks for the response. This week's poll asks, what is the highest number of husbands found in your family line for a single woman? 2, 5, 8? Let us know now at extremegenes.com. We received a great email from Carrie Mickelson in Little Rock, listening on FM 1029 KARN News Radio. She wrote, Fisher, loved hearing your visit with Sean in Cincinnati about not only finding the shadow box display of the World War II medals, but also the lengths he went to return them to the family. I've been at both ends of such a situation, having found a family Bible that I got into the hands of a descendant in Michigan, but I also received a photograph of a great-great-grandfather from a stranger in Pennsylvania. I can't really say which one feels better. Both ways, it's awesome. Thanks for that, Carrie. You are so right. It always seems to come back to you when you're helping someone else out. If you have a comment on the show or a question of any kind, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me at fisher@extremegenes.com, or you can call our toll-free Find line at 1-234-56-GENES. That's 1-234-56-GENES. Or you can drop us a line at our Facebook page. And please, while you're there, give us a like. We would love to have you along as part of our growing Extreme Genes Facebook community. It's time once again for your family histoire news from the pages of extremegenes.com. We start this week with this. The New York Times is reporting that Ashkenazi Jewish women are being told it's important to be screened for genetic mutations that's associated with high rates of breast and ovarian cancer. Most Jewish people in the United States are Ashkenazi, and the practice of testing women for these genetic mutations only when other women within their family have a history of cancer is now being criticized as insufficient. A study in Israel is recommending that all Ashkenazi women should have routine screenings for these dangerous genes known as BRCA1 and BRCA2. BRCA is the type of genetic mutation that caused Angelina Jolie to have a preventative double mastectomy last year, even though she's never been diagnosed with cancer. A director of the Medical Genetics Institute in Jerusalem says this should be offered as a universal screening test. We don't have many diseases with a mutation that so clearly affects risk as BRCA. Read the full article from the link at, speaking of which, extremegenes.com. Story number 2. The Thorn Gazette from the UK has an amazing story of a man who went about researching his family because of his father's dying wish. The father, John Jackson, was born in 1923 and had discovered from his birth certificate that his birth name was actually Pepper. His mother revealed to him that his birth father had been a bigamist who left his English family and started a whole new family in Australia. John was unable to locate his Aussie family before his passing, but recently his son Ian, after 15 years, fulfilled his promise to his dying father made in 1998. He found John's last surviving sister. It has nothing but a very happy ending, and you can read all about it and check out the photos from the link at extremegenes.com. And coming up next, our guest will be Rick Turley, assistant historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. What is the LDS Church doing to preserve the millions of microfilm rolls and billions of family history images it has collected over the years? And what have they learned that can help all of us to be sure our family records last a long time? Rick's got a lot of aha moments waiting for us next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, Family History Radio, and extremegenes.com.
Your priceless 8mm home movies and your precious family videos are deteriorating right now. Heat, moisture, insects, dust, mold, time, they're all robbing you of your family's memories. It's time to preserve those treasures right now by digitizing them at tmcplace.com. They've been preserving memories for over 40 years. Home movies, videos, audio tapes, vinyl records, photos, slides, and even scrapbooks. Whether your treasures are enduring the humidity of Massachusetts or the heat of Arizona, tmcplace.com can digitize your audio and images without harming the originals and returning them to you with free shipping both ways on most orders. tmcplace.com can even let you track your package in real time with a special GPS tracking device. Trustworthy, experienced, affordable. Call tmcplace.com toll-free at 1-866-483-1717 to talk to Extreme Genes Preservation Authority Tom Perry about your project. Or order online at shop.tmcplace.com.
While we all love diving into the deep end of our gene pool, don't forget about capturing the histories of those who are still with us. Go to Storyworth.com to start your family's story today. Each week, Storyworth.com will email a question to people whose stories you wish to preserve. Questions like, tell us about the day you got engaged, or what do you remember about your grandmother? All they have to do is reply with a story, either by email or by telephone. That story is then forwarded to the family and securely stored in a private online storybook. It doesn't get any simpler. You can enroll up to 6 storytellers for, get this, just $49 a year. You'll get a free 1-month trial, and for a limited time, Extreme Genes listeners get an additional 10% discount at Storyworth.com/extremegenes. That's Storyworth.com/extremegenes. Is your family story worth 13 cents a day? Sign up now at Storyworth.com/extremegenes. Simple, secure, effective. Your story is worth telling.
You know, when it comes to family history, there's nothing quite like the thrill of the hunt and the excitement generated by every new discovery. Who were your immigrant ancestors? What ship did they come over on? Why did they come when they did? Did they participate in any military campaigns that took place in their day? What personal challenges did your forefathers and mothers endure? Heritage Consulting, Genealogy Research Services can get you the answers to many of these questions and more. They've been providing professional research and consultation services since 1978. Call toll-free 1-877-537-2000 to speak directly to a professional family history researcher. Heritage Consulting can research, collect, analyze, and interpret the countless documents your ancestors generated throughout their lives and present the findings to you in an attractive book or in an electronic format. The cost? Far less than you'd expect for far more than you can imagine. 877-537-2000 or go to heritageconsulting.com.
And welcome back to Extreme Genes Family History Radio, extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio roots sleuth. And on the line with us today, we've got Rick Turley. He is the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. And as you may well know, of course, FamilySearch.org is a great supporter of the show. And so many people save a lot of their material through the LDS Church. So we thought we'd get Rick on today and talk about preservation a little bit. Rick, welcome to the show. Nice to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
The church has a huge vault that I think many people understand is packed in a granite chunk of rock. Tell us about that. How long has it been around? How did that get developed? And what's the background with it?
Sure. About a half century ago, church leaders became concerned that the microfilm we were collecting from all around the world needed to be preserved in spite of what was happening in the world at large. It was at the height of the Cold War, and people were worrying about, global attack and so forth. So they made a decision to drill a series of holes into a block of granite on the side of a canyon southeast of Salt Lake City. And they drilled what ultimately ended up being 6 vaults in there, so that the material that's deepest in the mountain is actually about 700 feet underneath a block of solid granite.
Wow.
And then inside those 6 vaults, they put a series of shelves, and into those shelves eventually went the 2.4 million reels of microfilm that were accumulated over the years.
So this is still in use today, of course.
Yes, it's still in use, although we have shifted from microfilm technology to digital technology as the primary form of gathering and distributing information. So one of the things we began doing years ago was to take those reels of microfilm and to turn them into digital form. Last year, we converted about, I think the number was something like 285 million images from microfilm to digital. And those digital images then go into a program that we call Family Search Indexing, and that allows volunteers around the world at home in their pajamas and their stocking feet to look at images and type the vital information so that these images are then searchable by computers.
Wow.
And since we launched that, over 1 billion names have been indexed by hundreds of thousands of volunteers. We're grateful to these volunteers around the world who have given their time for this purpose.
And these are Mormons and members of other faiths or members of no faith at all?
That's right. It's whoever would like to volunteer, and that group of volunteers, hundreds of thousands of them, as I've mentioned, have taken these records gathered from around the world, billions of names, and are rapidly making them available to people everywhere who can then search their family histories.
Well, that's exciting stuff. Now, talk about the microfilms. You mentioned 2.4 million microfilms. Then you talked about billions of images. Obviously, there are many images on each of these microfilms. How long before you can get 2.4 million reels actually digitized and indexed?
Well, we should wrap that up within the next decade. When we first started, it seemed an impossible task. Some of our people who examined the problem essentially said, well, it's going to cost far more than you can afford, and it's going to take far longer than you have. But we decided to get started anyway. Our belief was that if we got started, the technology would advance at such a pace that we would eventually develop a rate that would allow us to get it done in a relatively short period of time, and that, in fact, is happening.
Isn't that exciting? That's great stuff. And I'm always seeing new things appear there that's been indexed out by volunteers around the world. So with the microfilms, what do you do now? Do you keep them as they are? Do you re-digitize them? I mean, because discs and digitized material eventually, depending on what it's kept on, the digitized information disappears, does it not?
We do two things. First of all, we hang on to that microfilm. That becomes our original from which we can later rescan the material if that's necessary. Also, some records that were microfilm were later destroyed by natural disasters. So we have what's actually the earliest copy of that material that's still in existence. So we're going to retain that. We're putting it into compact shelving and keeping it inside the granite mountain. But we're also developing a way of preserving those digital images for future generations. We looked for a long time to see if there wasn't some kind of archival medium that could be used to store digital information in perpetuity. And ultimately, the conclusion we came to is that there is no medium that is good enough to preserve digital information in perpetuity. So at that point, we developed a new model. Rather than thinking about the underlying medium, the disc or the
what it's made of.
That's right. Rather than thinking about the physical medium, we began thinking about the information as the record itself. And we determined that using digital technology, we could store multiple copies of records and use computer programs to constantly check the integrity of those records. And if we found that one was beginning to deteriorate, we could pull the tape that was storing it or other medium, and we could put in a new one and then use the other copies that were still intact and make another perfect copy onto this new medium. So by doing that perpetually, we can just push forward all of those digital images in virtually perfect order for generations to come.
So in other words, you never have a crash because you have so many different places of backup.
That's right. If you store enough copies, then if something happens to one, you still have others from which you can make, using digital technology, another perfect copy. That's the beauty of digital. If you have a perfect copy, you can make another perfect copy. With photography, every time you make a copy, you lose a little bit of the information.
Right.
It becomes blurrier and blurrier. But with digital technology, as long as you have a perfect copy, you can make another one. And if you store enough perfect copies, and if one goes bad, you can take that bad one, throw it away, and make yet another perfect copy. And by storing them in multiple locations, if there's an earthquake or a tornado or a flood or a hurricane, you can still have other perfect copies that are not affected, from which you can later make a copy to put back in that place where it was destroyed.
So we were talking about the vault moments ago, but you say there are many other places where you store this?
Ultimately, we'll have a system that will store perfect digital copies in multiple locations so that despite world events, we'll still have good copies from which we can serve people.
We're talking to Rick Turley. He's the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, who have collected more genealogical material than pretty much, anybody ever. And Rick, it's still happening, is it not?
It is. We continue to collect a lot of information around the world to help people in searching their family histories.
Now, how many volunteers do you have out now? Are they still microfilming when they gather material, or do they do it digitally right from the get-go now?
There are camera teams around the world, and the numbers vary, but over the years they've varied, 200 to 300 teams. And nowadays they use principally digital cameras to capture the information. Using digital cameras has a number of advantages. For one thing, you can see at the moment of capture whether or not you've made a good image. In the old days with microfilm cameras, if you took a shot, you had to take that microfilm and ship it to a processing plant, and the processing plant would then develop the film, and then people studying the film would learn whether or not you'd made a good shot. Now with digital technology, the person who's got the camera can look at a screen and determine whether or not they have a good capture immediately. So that decreases the number of bad images taken, increases the total quality. And then those digital images can be fairly easily shipped to where they can then go into our system of family search indexing.
From digitizing to getting them online at FamilySearch.org, how fast is the turnover?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm no longer associated with FamilySearch.org because I moved over to our church history department from our family history department. But it's relatively fast compared to the way it used to be. It used to be you'd have to take that microfilm and ship it, and shipping alone could take weeks before the microfilm would arrive. Then it had to queue up and wait for processing. Now, none of that's necessary. We don't have to ship it physically. It's just transferred electronically, and that happens very, very quickly. And then once it arrives, it can be processed much more quickly than it was before.
Rick, you mentioned some things about this transfer of digital stuff earlier in the segment in the vault and how you're looking for the integrity and when it starts to break down. What can we as individuals take from that as far as preserving our own personal data?
Well, I'm afraid that many people who use digital cameras today or who store their family history information digitally are in for a horrible surprise. One day, the hard drive on which they store all this material is going to crash, and if they don't have a backup, that's going to be the end of it all. I can give you a terrible example from my own family. One of my sons got married last year, and there were 3 photographers at the wedding. So those of us who were family members didn't take a lot of photographs ourselves. There were 3 photographers there, all working for the same company. They took video. They took still photos of the wedding, spectacular images, and then they put them all on one hard drive where they were going to clean them all up and then make multiple copies to send out. Right at that moment when they had them all on one hard drive, the hard drive crashed, and despite all their later efforts with technologists to try to recover the photos, they were all lost. We don't have a single photograph from any of those 3 photographers. Well, there are going to be people all around the world who have been storing information on their hard drives. They're going to experience something quite similar unless they do what we do, unless they make multiple good copies and continue to transfer those from one medium to another. So I'd recommend that you, first of all, get a computer that has a RAID array technology that essentially has 2 hard drives that are constantly checking each other.
Right.
You pay a little bit more for that, but it's well worth the effort. Then I would recommend backing it up on a regular basis to an off-site hard drive.
Are you talking like a cloud?
Do it that way, and then I would also, in addition to putting it in the cloud, I would also put it on a portable hard drive and maybe put that in your safety deposit box. If you do that, if you have all these multiple copies, then if one goes bad, you've still got a good copy from which you can make a copy to transfer for.
Okay, what about individual discs, like DVDs?
Discs are wonderful. Thumb drives are wonderful, but I wouldn't trust a disc more than about 3 years. They could last 10, but they might only last 4. If you have just one copy, that's not enough. If you made multiple copies and then just keep every other year transferring those to new discs and then checking them to make sure that they're good, that's a better way of going.
Boy, it sounds like an awful lot of work, doesn't it? Especially if you have a lot of stuff to be making a project every other year. But if you value it that much, you got to do it.
You have to do it, and I wouldn't depend necessarily on a commercial service for doing it for you. There are some commercial services that offer, storing everything you have in the cloud, but that depends on a lot of factors that can create problems that you might not be aware of. Software that they download on your computer might not run correctly with your machine, or the pipe between you and the cloud may be clogged before all the data gets loaded. There are lots of things that can go wrong. I've seen that happen with friends who have lost a lot of data because they relied on a commercial service to do it all for you. Yes, use a commercial service. They're wonderful. I use one myself, but don't let that be your only copy.
All right. Great advice from Rick Turley. He's the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And Rick, that you bring up a point here. Maybe we turn it over to somebody else, maybe somebody like Family Search or the LDS Church or a local library. Let's talk more about that and what we look for in an organization and how they might preserve our material when we return in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes Family History Radio and ExtremeGenes.com.
Hello, Extreme Genes listeners. I'm Larry Gelwicks, the getaway guru and host of the Travel Show radio broadcast with the hottest travel deals on the planet. And now you can travel more and pay less by joining me on our Travel Show podcast. Cruises, tours, resort hotels, airline tickets, stay close to home, or travel the world. I'll show you how to travel more and pay less. Go online to ColumbusVacations.com. That's ColumbusVacations.com. Click on radio and then click on podcast. It's really that simple. ColumbusVacations.com, radio and podcast for the hottest travel deals on the planet.
Got a brick wall in your family tree? Don't know how to break through it? Get professional help from Heritage Consulting Genealogy Research Services. Speak directly with an experienced genealogical researcher, not a salesperson, by calling toll-free 1-877-537-2000. When you call, ask how you could win a free 1-hour consultation with an expert genealogist. Heritage Consulting Genealogy Research Services, with over 35 years of research experience. Visit heritageconsulting.com. Did you know your families' memories are being destroyed a little at a time every day. It's true. Old home movies, slides, photos, and audio recordings fade over time. The longer you delay the digitizing of these priceless artifacts, the more likely it is they'll be gone one day. That's why you need to call the Multimedia Center.
I brought in VHS videotape and had them transferred to DVD.
The Multimedia Center, 2870 East, 3300 South, Salt Lake City. Open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. Call 801-483-1717 or go to transferduplication.com.
And we are back. It is Extreme Genes Family History Radio, America's Family History Show. It is Fisher here, along with Rick Turley. He is the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, who, of course, have stored family history material going back, to the 1890s or something like that, Rick?
Well, we began collecting family history materials in a systematic way in the 1890s. We began using microfilm in 1938. And, of course, we have a vast amount of information stored in that microfilm and increasingly in digital form.
And we were talking about what the church does to maintain this stuff because, as we know, disks and hard drives crash and digital material is lost. And Rick was talking about their process of keeping it going as an institution. So obviously, institutions outlive human beings, Rick, and that kind of leads us to this next area here. We're all going to move on at some point, and many of us who have gathered a lot of information want to make sure that our life's work is not lost. What kind of advice would you give to people who are looking to share their material with an institution?
If you can find an institution that will take your material as a donation and treat it well, then that's the best way to preserve it in the long run. If you don't find such an institution, then the best thing to do is to find perhaps a relative who has that kind of determination. But there is a lot of risk in passing it down from one family member to another. One of those risks is that you might store it in a place that you think is safe, and it might turn out not to be safe. For example, a lot of people store their family treasures in their attic or in their basement, and unfortunately, both of those locations will probably cause the material to deteriorate far too fast. I've seen many families in which you have someone who treasures all of this family history information. Then the person passes away. Everybody comes into town for the funeral and to try to resolve the estate matters. And I've watched a lot of material, unfortunately, go out in the dumpster as family members don't recognize the importance of material and they're quickly cleaning out the home.
I can't believe how many people I've found with family Bibles they said they got from a dumpster when somebody died.
It happens all the time. You would think that the family members, the close family members of people who are the sort of the central genealogist of a particular family would have the sensitivity not to do that. But at the time of death, when everybody's rushing around, they'll see a box of papers or they'll see a stack of old things and they'll think, well, they're just old papers, and they'll throw them away. The other thing that happens is that these materials often just get destroyed in some type of disaster. A house burns down, the basement floods, the attic overheats and causes material that's up there to deteriorate rapidly. Another thing that happens sometimes when you pass material down from generation to generation is that it gets loved to death. So it gets handed down to somebody who loves an original letter or photograph, so they frame it. They put it in their living room in front of the window so that it gets good light, and within a short period of time it's deteriorated. If you can find an institution that will take the material and store it well, that's the best thing to do. So what kind of institution do you look for? You look for an institution that's willing to take your material, store it in the kinds of storage containers that will cause it to last for the longest period of time, in the kinds of storage rooms where it will last for a long time.
Right.
There's something that you can learn about this for your own individual storage purposes. When people say to me, how do I store this in my home if I don't want to give it away, I tell them, put it in an archival kind of box or folder, then put that in an interior closet space at the same level where you're living. So if you're living on the main floor, find a closet that doesn't have a side that's part of the outside wall of your house, because if it has a wall that's part of the outside wall of your house, it's going to change in temperature and relative humidity rather rapidly as the weather outside changes. If you store it in an inside closet, then you do several things simultaneously. You put it into an environment where it's going to be much more stable over time, because it's the fluctuations that cause the fibers to expand and contract, and essentially tear themselves apart. And the other thing that you do is that you keep them in the dark. unfortunately, sunlight is very deteriorating to materials that we love. So I don't recommend taking rare family photographs and documents and framing them and hanging them up in a room. All light will cause them to deteriorate, and sunlight is particularly bad. If you're going to hang them up, if you just have to have them someplace where you show them to people in a frame, I would make certain that they're framed with museum glass that has ultraviolet filtering built into it, so that it will continue to fade, but it'll fade at a far slower rate. But if you can find an institution that is willing to store it for you under good archival conditions, then you can make certain that that material will remain there from generation to generation, because most institutions store things under better conditions than we can as individuals, and most institutions have a perpetual kind of life. Now, I'm not saying that a local historical society couldn't somehow or another eventually close down or deteriorate or burn down, but if you can find a good institution that will keep it under good conditions, so much the better in terms of improving the likelihood of making it last. What we do in Salt Lake City to preserve materials, our Granite Mountain Records Vault, where we store a lot of our family history materials, that naturally maintains itself at an even temperature and relative humidity year-round. There are some fluctuations, but they're not nearly what you'd find in a home, for example, or in an office space. In the Church History Library in downtown Salt Lake City, we have equipment that controls temperature, relative humidity, and that filters out particulates. We store them in vaults that have thick walls made out of steel and concrete, and all of that together makes certain that material is stored in the dark under ideal kinds of storage conditions and can last for hundreds, if not thousands, of additional years.
Isn't that interesting that paper is one of those things that actually lasts a whole lot longer than our modern digital stuff?
It does. You know, one of the great ironies is that as human beings have increased their technologies, improved their technologies, they've actually decreased the life of the material on which they're storing the information. So if you think about the oldest records carved in stone, stone will last hundreds of thousands of years potentially, if it's not, in the weather.
Sure.
Sometimes, if you look at some grave markers that have been around for only 100 years or so, if they're soft stone, you'll see deterioration. But if it's hard stone and it's stored out of the weather, then it will last for hundreds of thousands of years. You move from there to clay. Thousands of years ago, people started using clay tablets to store information, and those clay tablets are still around after thousands of years. Eventually, people moved from clay to papyrus, a reed that you can split and cross-lay and then pound it to form a early form of paper. In fact, our word paper comes from papyrus. Papyrus, stored in the dry sands of Egypt and elsewhere, is still around after thousands of years. It's organic, so it's going to deteriorate faster than the clay or stone, but still it can last for a long time. Along comes paper, and paper, I've seen papers hundreds of years old, high-quality papers that have been stored well, and they're still as soft and flexible as the day that they were created. On the other hand, I've seen paper from, say, the 1880s that is not made out of good materials and that has not been stored in good conditions, and you can take a leaf of that paper and blow on it, and it will break into lots of pieces.
Yes. I recently obtained a Fisher family Bible from the 1840s. Very, very delicate sheets, and I had to put them in acid-free sleeves and, like you say, keep them in the dark. In order to display it, I decided I would scan them and fix them up with Photoshop on photographic paper, and then I framed that, so that I could keep the originals well stored. But it is amazing how delicate they can be, and yet we've got books that are in libraries that go back to the 1500s easily.
Yes, the first printed books go back, of course, to the latter part of the 1400s, and then we have manuscripts that were written on paper that go back many, many years before that. So paper can be a very good medium. Regrettably, when we went from paper to magnetic media, such as our cassette tapes, we entered a realm where the material lasts perhaps a few decades. If you have old cassette tapes, 20, 30 years old, and you try to play them, you probably notice a lot of bleed through from one layer of tape to the next. If you don't transfer them to a digital format, over time they're going to deteriorate entirely. Then you move from tapes to a lot of the discs that we use nowadays, and as I said in the earlier segment, I wouldn't trust those beyond just a couple of years. If you were to take all of this and plot it, you can see that with stone you have hundreds of thousands of years, clay tens of thousands of years, papyrus thousands of years, paper hundreds of years, magnetic media tens of years, and now with our newest technology, just years. As the technology increases in its sophistication, its lifespan decreases.
Interesting. And what's going to happen from here, who knows? Rick, it's been a pleasure visiting with you. Thank you so much for your time. He's the assistant church historian and recorder for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Great information. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You know, when it comes to family history, there's nothing quite like the thrill of the hunt and the excitement generated by every new discovery. Who were your immigrant ancestors? What ship did they come over on? Why did they come when they did? Did they participate in any military campaigns that took place in their day? What personal challenges did your forefathers and mothers endure? Heritage Consulting, Genealogy Research Services can get you the answers to many of these questions and more. They've been providing professional research and consultation services since 1978. Call toll-free 1-877-537-2000 to speak directly to a professional family history researcher. Heritage Consulting can research, collect, analyze, and interpret the countless documents your ancestors generated throughout their lives and present the findings to you in an attractive book or in an electronic format. The cost? Far less than you'd expect for far more than you can imagine. 877-537-2000 or go to heritageconsulting.com.
While we all love diving into the deep end of our gene pool, don't forget about capturing the histories of those who are still with us. Go to StoryWorth.com to start your family's story today. Each week, StoryWorth.com will email a question to people whose stories you wish to preserve. Questions like, tell us about the day you got engaged, or what do you remember about your grandmother? All they have to do is reply with a story, either by email or by telephone. That story is then forwarded to the family and securely stored in a private online storybook. It doesn't get any simpler. You can enroll up to 6 storytellers for, get this, just $49 a year. You'll get a free 1-month trial, and for a limited time, Extreme Genes listeners get an additional 10% discount at storyworth.com/extremegenes. That's storyworth.com/extremegenes. Is your family story worth 13 cents a day? Sign up now at storyworth.com/extremegenes. Simple, secure, effective. Your story is worth telling.
Remember how fun it was to capture those special moments of your children's childhood on video and watch it back, knowing that you'd be able to have that memory forever? Or watching a home movie of your own childhood and seeing many of your loved ones who are now gone. If you haven't yet digitized those family treasures, you're at risk of losing all of them with each passing day. Time and elements slowly destroy videos and film, as well as rare old photos and audio recordings. Rescuing your memories is what TMCplace.com has been doing for over 40 years. They can transfer all these discs and hard drives so you and your family can enjoy them digitally for generations to come, and without damaging the originals. They provide free shipping both ways on most orders. They even offer GPS real-time tracking of your package so you can be confident that nothing can ever be lost in transit. Call toll-free 1-866-483-1717 to talk to Extreme Genes Preservation Authority Tom Perry about your special project, or order online at shop.tmcplace.com.
Hey, welcome back to Extreme Genes Family History Radio, extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And it's all about preservation today. Of course, Rick Turley was just in from the LDS Church talking about mostly how the institutions do it. And, of course, Tom Perry is our preservation specialist we've had on the show since the beginning. And, Tom, he had a lot of great stuff in there.
Oh, he did. Rick had some awesome information. In fact, one of the things he talked about, I want to add a little thing to, where he talked about the best place to store stuff is on the level you live because you're more cognizant of the changes in temperature. And he says a closet is a good place, but make sure it doesn't have an exterior wall. Another thing you want to be careful of is make sure there's not any duct work. I don't mean, ducks and geese. I mean duct work that handles your heat and your AC. Because we had a customer once that stacked several rolls of 8mm film in a closet up on the very top shelf, not realizing that top shelf, one of the borders was the heating duct. And it was there for, he said, like 30, 40 years or something. When he brought the film in, or first when he took it down, he opened the top box, it had all turned to dust.
Oh.
Heat, just constant heat change. Like Rick talked about, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, broke down the film. But the farther he got down in his roll of about 10 rolls of film, they were fine below that because the top ones took all the brunt. So be careful that you don't have any what they call bulkheads running through your closets that are going to change the temperature. If so, you need to somehow insulate them with some aluminum type insulation or something like that. But the best thing to do is store them down on the floor. And another thing he mentioned, make sure you keep it on the level you live on. But if you're on a level where you could have a flood, if a toilet backs up or anything, make sure they're off the floor enough that you're going to be able to have a foot or 2 feet of water in there, and they're not going to be soaked.
Yeah, I've been through a flood where that happened, and it was brutal. I had stuff in a safe. Of course, the safe was for fire, and I didn't know that a safe that's tight enough for fire is not tight enough for water. And I lost some very important things in it and learned a lot from that. So that's great advice.
Now, one thing he talked about a little bit, let me go into a little bit more detail, is about discs. There's good discs out there and there's bad discs out there. Most of the discs you're going to buy at Walmart or someplace like that don't have good quality dye in them, and so they're only going to last. You know, I've had situations where people have had them and 3 years later they didn't work anymore. And people lost everything thinking they had archived it on disc. First mistake they made, they used a cheap disc. Second mistake they did, they only put it on disc.
Right, and they got rid of the original probably.
Exactly, or they borrowed them from other people, and this guy made a compilation of all the movies he had been in, could never replace it. It took him years to get all these components put together, put it on a cheap disc. 3 years later, tried to go to an interview, gave him the disc, it wouldn't work.
Oh.
So make sure you use a good quality disc, and I preach on here all the time. I use Tyo-Uden discs. You can go to our website and see how it's spelled, and you can order them. Most stores don't sell them because they won't sell them to Walmart and places like that. You can buy them online. You can buy them from us. But buy a good quality Tyo-Uden disc, and you should never have problems. You know, we've been doing discs for 20 years, and I have never had one Tyo-Uden fail. So nothing. But
they do have a life, don't they? I mean, they have to go on. How long do you think it'll last? Right now, you're saying you haven't had the end of one yet.
Yep, we've been doing it for 20 years. We have a warranty on all of our discs that come out of our store. We guarantee them for life. And we've been doing it for 20 years, never had one come back. The people that test them say the Tyo-Uden discs should last about 100 years.
Wow.
But after the break, let's come back and talk some more about some different ways of putting other kinds of storage on different kinds of discs and other things.
All right, it's all about preservation today on Extreme Genes Family History Radio and ExtremeGenes.com.
When was the last time you heard your grandmother's voice or saw your family enjoying life back in the 1950s or 60s? If the reason is you haven't known what to do with your old recordings, videos, and films, here's your answer. The Multimedia Center in Salt Lake City.
We brought in a video project to the Multimedia Center, and overnight they duplicated it to DVD so we could meet our deadline.
The Multimedia Center, 2870 East, 3300 South, Salt Lake City. Open Monday through Friday, 10 to 6. Call 801-483-1717 or go to transferduplication.com.
Hello, Extreme Genes listeners. I'm Larry Gelwicks, the getaway guru and host of the Travel Show radio broadcast with the hottest travel deals on the planet. And now you can travel more and pay less by joining me on our Travel Show podcast. Cruises, tours, resort hotels, airline tickets, stay close to home, or travel the world. I'll show you how to travel more and pay less. Go online to ColumbusVacations.com. That's ColumbusVacations.com. Click on radio, and then click on podcast. It's really that simple. ColumbusVacations.com, radio and podcast for the hottest travel deals on the planet.
Oh, these shows go way too fast. We're down to our final segment this week of Extreme Genes Family History Radio, America's Family History Show. I am Fisher. That is Tom Perry over there from TMCplace.com. He is our preservation authority. You can always ask him a question at AskTom@TMCplace.com. The whole show has been about preservation today. A lot of great stuff in here. What else do you have for us today, Tom?
Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about discs that we got into. Again, Tyo-Uden discs are the best kind to get. But no matter how good of a disc you use, I don't care if you use a millennial disc, you want to back it up on several different types of media. You want to back it up on a hard drive, a good quality hard drive, and I like Western Digital and LaCie drives. You also want to have it on a good quality disc, which I mentioned. I use Tyo-Udens. You want to also have it in the cloud. And if you're paranoid like I am, use two clouds and make sure they're not the same cloud, because you might get a cloud service from one vendor and from another vendor and find out they use the same cloud.
Yeah, that doesn't work too well.
Yeah. So I use iCloud, which Apple owns, and I also use Dropbox, which is a totally separate one. and I love them. I absolutely love them. The nice thing about Dropbox is I can have my photos on my iPad, my iPhone, my computer. I take a picture. It's instantly on the other ones via Dropbox, so it makes it nice and convenient. People can get to it. I have a friend in Dothan, Alabama that wants a couple pictures. I can give him an invite to my Dropbox. He can go right to them and download them, or movies or whatever.
And the same could apply for Google Drive, could it not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a lot of different options. The one thing you do not want to do, which we talked briefly on an earlier show, is don't use USB drives as long-term storage.
Right.
They use the cheapest, components they can make. That's why they're so inexpensive. 1 gigabyte you can buy for $15, $20, and they're on sale at Best Buy sometimes even for less. And there's a reason they're so cheap is because they make them so cheap. So if I'm at somebody's house and he wants to give me a picture, he can give it to me, or an article or whatever. I can take it home, plug it in my computer, and offload it on my computer, and then put it on the cloud or wherever.
It's just for transfer, basically.
Exactly. So it's just a transfer device to get it from somebody's media to somebody else's media. So they're great, but don't depend on it as a storage device because they're notorious for not being that good a quality. Plus, they're in your pocket. You can walk by a big magnet. Something can happen to it. We've had people that sat on them, brought them into our store, and we've tried to recover them. Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't. Same thing with SD cards. SD cards are great ways to store stuff. However, be careful where you store them. They're so small, they can end up in your pants and go through the washing machine.
Oh, yeah.
So many different things. So you want to have a place that you always store the SD cards or whatever in. And if there's one that's out, put a little sticker, it's in my pocket. I always put stuff like that on my radio before I go to bed because I always check, I've got an SD card that's not where it's supposed to be. So I put it in my fireproof safe every night. So if we have a fire, hopefully not a flood, it'll be safe.
And also, if you pull out a thumb drive too quickly from your computer, you could destroy the whole thing.
Oh, that's devastating. That's like getting a letter that you're sending off to a friend in Florida and you erase part of the address. It doesn't do you any good. If it's 3030 South and it says 30 South, they're not going to be able to find it for you. So that is really, really bad. You can totally corrupt it. Everything you have on that can be totally gone. Not just the file you're working on, but it can corrupt the entire drive so you can't even read it anymore. And be really, really careful if you're switching stuff between like a Macintosh or an Apple computer and a PC. If you put it in and it says it doesn't read it or something, try to eject it from the computer. If you can't eject it from the computer, what you want to do is shut down your computer, make sure it's totally off, no power going through it or anything, then remove it. If you can eject it and it says, okay, safely to remove, then go ahead and take it out. Most computers nowadays will read it, whether it's done on an Apple or on a PC, but sometimes they won't. If you're ever unsure whether it's ejected or not, just shut down your computer. It'll take 5 minutes of your time. When it's totally shut down, there's no lights on, everything's off, pull it out, and then restart your computer. Because if you do that, you won't corrupt it. But that's one thing that's notorious, is destroying those things by pulling them out when they're still accessing them. Don't pay attention to the little flashing lights. See what your computer says if it's been released.
Wow. This has been an amazing show on preservation this week. Thanks again to Tom. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.